Okay, good morning. So today we're going to work on the unknown ionic compound lab. For this lab, we have two unknowns. We have unknown 1 and unknown 2. And the goal of this lab, of course, is to figure out which one of them is ionic. So we're going to do a series of tests on them. In order to do the test, we're going to use what we call a conductivity meter. So to do this, we want to test to make sure the meter is working. So I could simply touch the two electrodes to a piece of metal, and we see that it lights up, so this meter is working. Now, how does this work? The electrical charge is being carried down the wire by mobile electrons. Those mobile electrons pass the charge onto the mobile electrons of the metal, which carries the charge to this electrode and transfers them to these mobile electrons, which now carries it up the wire on this side. So you wind up with an electrical circuit. Okay? You could also simply just touch the two electrodes together and we see it lights up, because what you're doing here is, again, continuing the circuit. The mobile electrons are traveling down this wire and passing the charge onto these mobile electrons, which are completing the circuit. So we see that the meter is working. Now, what we're going to do is see if these two substances will conduct in the solid phase. So if I were to simply just put the electrode into the solid phase of unknown number 1, we see that it does not conduct in the solid phase, does not light up. And for unknown number 2, we do the same thing. We stick it into the solid phase and we see that it does not light up. So neither one of these conducts electricity in the solid phase. Moving on to part 3, the conductivity of tap water. So tap water is water that simply comes right out of the faucet, and we put the conductivity meter in there, and we see, actually let me use the other one, we see that it does light up slightly. I don't know if you can see that, it's very dim. Yeah, it does light up very, very slightly, but it is pretty dim. But why is it lighting up? Because it shows us this particular water is conducting electricity. So how does that work? So as the mobile electrons on the wire are taking the electrical current down the wire, they pass that charge onto the ions that are in the tap water, and those ions move across and transfer the charge onto the mobile electrons on the other electrode and complete the circuit. So we see that in tap water there are ions, free-floating ions, that are actually carrying the charge and moving the charge through the water. Now, if we were to take some deionized water, so deionized water means we've taken the ions out of the water, and if we put the electrodes in here, we see it does not light up at all. So we see that there are no ions in this water at all. It's been deionized. Okay, the next step would be to dissolve the solid. So we're going to see if when we dissolve these, they conduct. So to do that, we're going to use again the deionized water, because I want to make sure I'm not introducing ions into the dissolved solution. So when I dissolved number 1, so this is number 1, and I dissolved it with deionized water, I see that it does not light up. In other words, it did not produce ions. Okay? Now I look at unknown number 2 and dissolved it again with deionized water, and I see this one lights up very brightly. So that shows me there are now free-floating ions in that deionized water. So when we dissolved number 2, number 2 produced ions. And then finally, the last one is we are going to, we're going to dissolve these two. We're going to melt these two and see if when they're in the melted phase, we're going to melt down these solids and see if they produce ions. So again, we'll start with number 1. And number one melted very quickly. So let's see if this one lights up. So in the melted phase, it does not have any ions present, so it's not lighting up. Okay. Now we'll take unknown number 2, and we'll do the same procedure. And unknown number 2 is not melting as quickly. It's requiring a lot more heating to get it to melt. And as you can see, the metal is actually getting very, very hot. It's turning red. And it's starting to melt now. So now we've got it melted, and now we're going to see if this conducts. So let's just get it in here. And we see this one does conduct when it's melted. Okay, so number 2, when we melted it into the liquid phase, it actually did conduct. Okay, so that's the data. And now what you need to do is go back, look at the data, and determine which one is the ionic substance.